Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me once again as we look to the horizon. I'm back bringing you my weekly writing vlog, and as promised, we're doing something a little bit different today. I'm in the development process for my next fiction project, which I'm calling the Sidereal Saga. If you've never heard the term, sidereal is kind of the opposite of terrestrial. Instead of having to do with the Earth, it has to do with the stars in the sky. And as you might guess from this, it's a bit of a space opera. Not a traditional one. One of the core ideas is that instead of traveling through the stars, people jump from planet to planet in something of an homage to John Carter of Earth. But one of the things I was interested in doing with this series was building an aesthetically and politically different vision of the future. So what do I mean by that? Well, most space operas are defined by a couple of things. There are large star system spanning governments, there's huge fleets of ships, and there are large armies that jump from planet to planet in wars of conquest or perhaps peacekeeping missions to deal with rowdy locals on a given planet. The galaxy of a space opera usually has more in common with Earth in the age of sail or exploration than it does any other time period. And what I was really interested in was something a little bit different. I was interested in a sci-fi epic that explored themes a little closer to the present, but still very much rooted in the past. I had my sights pretty firmly set on the Roaring Twenties. Isolationism, prohibition, organized crime. These were ideas that I wanted to explore in a sci-fi setting that wasn't cyberpunk. Again, you do see these things, but you tend to see them in a very constrained and claustrophobic environment. But the reality of the 20s, especially in the United States, was the nation at home was not completely filled up yet, and there were still a lot of people looking outwards in an attitude of exploration. Even though it was beginning to feel like the world was filling up, there was a sense that there was still a lot out there to be discovered, especially in the past. At the same time, technology was advancing, and people were starting to see the potentials of things like air travel. It was a very different time. And as you might have guessed from the images you're seeing on screen, not only did I want to take some of the thematic elements for my story from that, but I also wanted to take some of the visual elements. Many of the heroes here have their designs based on barnstormers or deep jungle explorers, or at least the popular conception of what these people were like. Some people will walk the line between respectability and the more unsavory side of things, playing with the idea of private investigators or organized crime. Being as it is fundamentally a space opera, the Sidereal Saga is going to have a pretty big cast. In order to help manage it, I intend to do something a little bit different from what I've done with any of my fiction projects in the past. Rather than construct a single overarching narrative, I intend to write a series of shorter stories. Not short stories, but perhaps very short novellas. Each of these stories will focus on a handful of characters, and eventually they will come together in perhaps a 30 to 40,000 word final installment that ties all of the loose ends together and gives us a clear picture of what everything has been building to. I definitely have a concrete endpoint in mind, but I'm also content to take my time getting there, and we may not get all the way there in one go. We may do maybe half of the journey and then take a break and then do some more. One of the really interesting things about being able to stretch out a story in such a way is that it does give you a lot of flexibility in how much you tell at any given time. Being the kind of person that craves a variety, being able to talk about many different aspects of this galaxy at once really appeals to me. And also having the option of wrapping up one of the brief storylines to do something else for maybe a month or two also has a lot of appeal. Now, you may be thinking this sounds a little bit like what I've been doing with the Roy Harper series, and you're not entirely incorrect. Much of what I've been experimenting with while writing Roy's adventures have had an influence on how I want to approach this story, but unlike with Roy's adventures, those really don't have an endpoint in mind. Typically, I just have an idea for a Roy Harper adventure, I jot it down, and eventually I get around to writing it all up. There is something like an outline for the Sidereal Saga, but there's also a lot of room in it to add extra installments or expand on ideas. But no matter what direction I go in, ultimately everything is going to be pushing towards that final conclusion. Whereas with Roy, while I do kind of have an idea for a final story for him in mind, one where he finally retires and, hangs up his sword, I don't really have any kind of major world developments or major clashes he has to have along the way to get there. I just know that I would eventually like him to be able to hang up his spurs and call it a day. Whereas with the Sidereal Saga, there are specific things about the galaxy I want to reveal, specific discoveries for specific characters, and while I'm going to take my time getting there, eventually everything is going to lead up to these points. I'm not going to allow myself to be too terribly sidetracked as I make my way there, or at least I'm going to be on the lookout for potential contradictions to those goals, and I'm going to spend a lot of time deciding whether I want to do something that could make it harder to get there. Even the central cast, some of whom you're seeing here, have specific limits to them, which is to say, I don't want there to be more than a certain number of protagonists or antagonists in the story at any given moment. That will just overclutter things. And while space operas are known for big casts and a lot going on, well, adding another character to a cast of a dozen or 24 is a much bigger ask of the audience than adding another character to a cast of 4 or 5. So I'm definitely going to be a lot more deliberate in adding spur-of-the-moment characters to the story. Something that, unfortunately, I find myself doing more often than I'd like. It does make things pretty complicated at times. So anyway, that's a little bit about the project I'm working on. You've seen some of the art I've drawn to help me solidify ideas as I develop characters and the setting. Hopefully that gives you an idea of the flavor and the tone that I'm going for. There will be more coming about this project as it gets closer to initial publication, but let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.